All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Leadership Table. I am Jen Kelchner, Forbes Coach Council member and Chief Hope Dealer at Kelchner Advisory Group. And today I'm really excited about our topic. We're going to be talking about the future of work, specifically really looking at the scope of the next 5 years as it relates to business, entrepreneurship. And I'm so excited to have a really good friend of mine, colleague, Dr. Philip Foster, with us today. And Philip, I'm going to introduce you just for a quick moment. Philip does a variety of things. He's like me, where he wears a lot of hats, covers a lot of boards from a global perspective. So he is a leadership business coach, consultant, adjunct professor. He is also a noted thought leader in business operations, organizational development, foresight, strategic leadership, facilitates change through design and implementation of strategies, strategic foresight, and planning. And if that weren't enough, he's also, in the last year, knocked out a best-selling book, Open Organization, a new era of leadership and organizational development, which you did after completing a master's in organizational leadership and a doctorate in strategic leadership. So you've been a busy guy.
Yes.
Definitely, not to mention a lot of the speaking opportunities you've been doing at a global level. So thank you for being a co-host with me today to talk about some pretty exciting stuff. So if you would start us out a little bit with a kind of an overview of open organization so that we can relate that to our conversation as we go on.
Well, sure. Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me onto this forum. It's very exciting. And so I miss seeing you in person. We used to hang out and have coffee face to face. I don't have my coffee with me today. So the open organization is actually a result of my doctoral thesis. But beyond that, it's a deeper look at into my own personal frustrations with the way business had been run, or we could argue is still being run. Mm-hmm. And so I looked around and I basically said, the way we do business is broken. And then I started to ask a question, well, is there someone out there doing it in a way that I think is correct or better? And so I started this journey really more in touch with my psychology background. And I was hoping to tie into something that looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And really, how do we meet the needs of people? And honestly, an organization has needs as well. So I thought there was this idea that Maslow's paid some homage to the corporate needs as well. Well, what I figured out was that there are companies out there doing really cool things, and they're not doing it the way I expected them to be doing it. And unfortunately, the organizations were high-tech companies. And a lot of people in the world of leadership and business thought that I revolve around in kind of negated my ideas. They said, oh, you're full of it. This will never happen. Hierarchy is here to stay. And so I kind of got ostracized by my community, if you will. But I moved on anyways, and I ended up writing a book, which is now going into its second year as being published, and I'm working on a third. So in essence, I discovered that an open organization is nothing more than a group of people that come together with a similar idea, similar mantra, culture. You can call it whatever you want, first principles, vision. I mean, there's so many words that encompass this idea, but they all come together with the idea that they want to do something cool. And the leaders of this organization have decided they're not going to run things like a hierarchy, top down. Right. In essence, what they're doing is saying, I'm hiring you to do a job, and I'm going to get out of your way. And I'm going to equip you to make good decisions. So that is what I discovered as I went through this process of trying to find organizations that were doing something really cool and innovative and different. And since then, I've discovered hundreds and hundreds of organizations, even many outside of the tech field, that are actually doing this. Construction companies, pharmaceuticals, all sorts of consulting firms, they're all doing this. And in fact, some of the best known organizations that are open, we touch every day. It could be Amazon or Zappos or some of those that are starting to do these flattening ideas, or matrix or other format that is not a hierarchy. So that's kind of in a nutshell what open organization is. I'm sure I left a whole bunch of meat out, but that's what it is.
So if someone wanted to get the book, though, to dig deeper, it is more of an academic book. Is that correct? Or is there from an organizational leader's perspective, is there a way to digest that the best way to begin looking how they can implement within their own organization?
Sure. If the book, The Open Organization, which is actually here over my shoulder, if you can see it.
I do.
You see that?
I do.
The book itself is available on Amazon. You can also go to my website, maximumchange.com, and there's a link under resources that'll take you direct to the publisher. If you're more interested in an overview of the ideas, it's more of my thesis statement, if you will. I have a smaller book called Organization 3.0, which was kind of the first step toward the open org. And it kind of outlines more of a historical perspective, not hysterical, but more historical. And it progresses from the 1800s and beyond, before that, and how we perceived leadership and the idea of leading people. And we move through this concept of different stages of leadership into Organization 3.0, which I consider to be the 21st century, and open, flat, distributed organizations.
So with that, one question before we kind of move into our big topic for the day, though, with open organizations and looking at how they're flattening out, what showed in the research in terms of either growth rates or satisfaction rates, improved morale by utilizing that versus the traditional hierarchy that most of us are accustomed to?
Well, what we're discovering is that organizations that are more flat and more empowered, employees that are allowed to do a job, they know specifically what they're supposed to do. They have some sort of rules of engagement or constitution or governance, if you will. They typically are happier in their jobs. They're more free to make decisions. They many times make better decisions. And here's what's really interesting. In their communication process, because much of it's done in chat boards, similar to what we have on this format here, there's a chat on the side, chat boards and email. What we're finding is that employees become more thoughtful and concise in their communication online because they don't want to waste time and energy. They want to get to the point. And so what we find is greater efficiencies they're coming about. Happiness is the happiness quotient, if you will, is pretty high. These organizations are not without their problems. However, many of the problems can be dealt with through systems and processes that are communicated clearly. These organizations are growing. They're able to what we call scale or expand and contract with the market pressures. And what we're finding is that many large organizations are now starting to pay attention to this and are starting to wonder, how can we do this? And so many of them are starting to institute this idea, maybe not organization-wide, but they might be doing it in a silo or a division or something. And so we're finding people taking notice of this idea of sharing information, communicating, and just empowering.
That's pretty incredible. And you may actually want to answer this question in our main topic, but are there any scalability concerns when you start talking about a large organization that wants to, start matching this flattened organization view?
Well, there certainly are some issues with scale and size that are currently being worked on. We look at organizations like Google and Yahoo as examples of organizations that started flat, empowered, and they have had to consolidate into one spot. And of course, Yahoo, I think it was three or 4 years ago, made big news when the new CEO came out and said, we're not allowing people to work from remote locations, which we're going to get into that in the main topic here. But what we're finding is that even large organizations can be pretty successful in their openness. It's just a matter of having formal processes. And let me just take that one step further. A lot of people that hear this idea of open imagine people just lounging around on couches and playing video games, and there's pretty much chaos. Nobody's doing any work. And what we really find is that an open organization is every bit as structured as a hierarchy. The only difference is in a hierarchy, you're waiting for decisions to come from top down. In an open organization, you yourself have the power to make a decision from the bottom up. And if I can just give you one example, when I was doing my research for my book, The Open Organization, I went and visited a tech firm in San Francisco for a weekend and talked to them about what they're doing and how they felt this might expand into other markets. And what I discovered was this. They had a client, a very large, well-known public sector, publicly traded client, maybe a Fortune 50 company. And this client had a technical issue that literally rendered it inoperable. They could not do anything on the tech side. And they had just paid money for their annual tech support for this product. And so they basically spent $250,000 for support, and they received a patch or something. They had a bug in it, and it basically shut them down. So the tech person said to them, you know what? This should have never happened. We're not only going to fix this right now, but I'm going to refund you. He said, I'm going to refund you your support fee for the year.
Wow.
$250,000, a support person, bottom layer of the company, if you're looking at it from a hierarchy standpoint, a $250,000 decision gave the money back. I was reading an article where they asked the CEO, how do you feel about giving away money that you just received? And the CEO said, well, I didn't even know that happened, but I'm glad that they did it. They did the right thing. So what we're finding is not only did they make the client happy, the goodwill that came out of it, you can't buy that with money because it ended up going all over the place. It was in newspapers and on blogs and things like this, where they were talking about it on video. And so that is just an example of how employees are empowered to make decisions and get out of the way. So there you go.
Sounds like there's such a sense of ownership with that, but it sounds as well as that model really removes a lot of fear, that fear-based mentality that often comes with hierarchy, or at least I felt it when I was in corporate America. That always is, you make one misstep off the agenda and you're going to be hearing about it for quite some time if it doesn't affect your overall year-end rating and performance reviews and those sorts of things. So it's very, very interesting. So let's get into our main topic, and I'll let you set this up. But if we're specifically really looking at your research in kind of the future of work, perhaps what that means to entrepreneurs, people that are potentially looking at being entrepreneurs, launching companies, existing organizations, and I'll kind of let you filter through that, and then we'll go from there.
Well, first of all, the future of business, the future of leadership, the future of entrepreneurship. Quite frankly, we are witnessing the greatest shift in things since we came up with scientific method for management. And I know that's kind of a really, professorial sounding thing, but basically what I'm saying is that everything we have learned, we're almost having to throw out a lot of it and say we're not doing that anymore. So here's what I mean. I know we said the next 5 years, but let me just tell you what's going to happen by the year 2025, which is a little bit outside of the 5-year stretch. 75% of all jobs by the year 2025 are going to be held by millennials. Now, I happen to know that you're in the millennial class, and I'm
No.
a little bit. Oh, come on, you're young. So I actually am in the Gen X class, and I'm kind of excited about this. I think I'm on the lower end of the Gen X, and not the, although everyone says I'm on the higher end. But anyhow, 75% of the workforce by 2025 is going to be millennials. That means that the majority of the jobs are being held by the up and coming age group that's behind you and I. Not only that, but by 2025, over half of the jobs are going to be held by independent workers. Now, when I say independent worker, I'm talking freelancers, contract labor. That means that in America alone, by the year 2025, over 42 million estimated Americans will be freelancers.
Wow.
Now, that is, only a few short years away from now. And I know that's outside the 5-year. But my point is the way we view how we do business and how we approach work in the future is going to change dramatically. And what we're seeing is technology like what we have here with video. I know I've used Skype and Google Hangout, and some people use FaceTime. We have Blab. On and on and on. We have all this technology. And so this type of technology that wasn't available to us 15 years ago as it is now is going to change the way we view work forever. And this is especially going to be good news for the entrepreneurs out there, people who are wanting to come up with creative ideas or wanting to reach a market. I know that you have a website. I obviously have a website. Many people that are going to listen to this video probably are going to have websites. Just by having a website on the World Wide Web, you are automatically considered an international company.
That's interesting.
Now, Jen Kelchner is one person, and she has a lot of colleagues and friends, but you're one person. You're still an international business because anyone in the world can contact you, can listen to your blogs and your blabs and all this other stuff, and they can access your information and you. You are now a global business. That means anyone that's in an entrepreneurial position or desiring to do a startup is automatically going to be a international business. Now, you're saying, well, wait a minute, they're just creating a coffee shop on the corner, or they want the local cleaners. They're going to set up a little cleaning business or something. It doesn't matter because once you're on the web, you're international. I have clients in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, in Europe, in Australia. All over the place.
Right.
All because I have a website. So that's good news for entrepreneurs. Now, I want to say one other thing about this idea of entrepreneurship in the future. I truly believe that we are 5 to 10 years away from what I call becoming a true maker society. And what I mean by that is that we are only a few years away from 3D printing being so good that we're going to be able to start printing things like our smartphone on our desk. That's going to open up a lot of other things as far as laws and technology and all that. But what's good is what it's going to bring for entrepreneurs in their future. Imagine, if you will, that you invest $5,000 or $1,000 or whatever these printers are going to end up costing in 5 years, and you have this printer in your garage, and you're printing out widgets and selling them all around the world.
Right.
And you don't even have to go to a manufacturer in China or wherever. You're doing it in your own backyard, in your own garage, in your own barn, whatever, your own living room. The way we're going to do business is going to change forever.
Well, it's definitely going to change the landscape. And, you had been talking about having that web presence, what that automatically means. And about a week ago, I was listening to a blog with Mark Schaefer, who's an expert with marketing, and he was talking about the content aspects of the internet, in that within 5 years, we'll double the amount of information. I'm sorry, not double, 500% times more information will be accessible and available, and the primary source of that will be video, and particularly live streaming. And so there are so many ways, like you said, just even from a tech standpoint, the different applications that are accessible for entrepreneurs to launch, grow business, and then how that changes. And what we're going to talk about is kind of the remote workforce that we see coming. And I that's less than 10 years away. We start talking about 2025, technically speaking. So it now is the time to really start preparing an organization for not just open leadership or open organization concepts, but this shift that's coming in business in general. So let's talk specifically. That's kind of like a little bit of what we see coming. What can organizations and individuals begin doing now to start preparing? And then if you want to talk about tech or whatever to weave in there is fine too.
Well, I think the biggest challenge that we're going to run into is finding skilled labor, individuals that have the capacity to do the things that need to happen. And we're no longer looking at a specialized workforce. In other words, I may have a doctorate in a certain area, but that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily the wave of the future. I'm probably going to be the exception to the rule. I used to laugh at this idea of people saying, "Oh, don't get your master's. It's a waste of time." I love education. I believe in education. I encourage education. But here's what I'm learning. Right now, there are so many people out there with graduate degrees, masters, and beyond, that the market is saturated. And we're all experts in a narrow area. The problem is the workforce of the future has to be not as specialized and more have a broader palette of skills. So no longer can you get by with I'm old enough to have people working with me and for me that didn't know how to type, much less turn on a computer. No longer can we have a workforce that doesn't know how to use a technology like a video or Skype or microphone or whatever. We no longer have that. No longer can we have a society that doesn't know how to use a smartphone. We have to have people that have a broad palette of skills. Now, here's the other thing. We have to learn as leaders, and this I'm speaking specifically to those who have businesses or want to start businesses, we have to relearn, if you will, how to manage people. Leadership used to be this idea that you influence people to do something for you. That was basically the old school definition of leadership. I'm influencing you, and it's either by age or power or position. I'm influencing you to do something. In other words, I'm motivating you to get the job done somehow. I'm either kicking tail or I'm passive aggressive or whatever methodology I'm using, I'm motivating you. The leader of the future has got to be totally different. And that person has to know how to empower. They have to know how to communicate. They have to know how to collaborate. They have to know how to integrate cultures and have a cultural acumen, if you will, that they understand differing cultures. But they also need to know how to create a organizational culture that works. So in my new definition of a leader today is someone who empowers and gets out of the way.
Right. I think that's important. So I've got a flurry of questions going on in my mind right now. I'm thinking a lot about, you're talking about this really needing this broad palette of skills and how to look at that, right? So as you know, some of the work I've been doing most recently with my program, Comparison is a Killer, we look at, or one thing I teach is about operating from what I call a genius zone. And I believe that comes from a variety of things, right? That's life experience. We're all rich in life experience, no matter our age. We've overcome or something has happened that we can pull a skill from and sharpen and develop. We have our education, we have our job experience, both paid and unpaid, through volunteer service, et cetera. And really looking at natural gifts and talents. And so I teach people to look for the common themes so they know really how to capitalize on their core strengths. What are some suggestions then that someone like myself, when I do coaching and consulting, can help the individual if they're making a decision about their upcoming career, or maybe even want to transition, to think about how to leverage what they know, or what should they be doing to fill in the gaps to look for this shift coming?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing that I run into, because I also do coaching myself, is individuals that think that they are not qualified or young enough, or there's always some issue that they're not able to do these things. Mm-hmm. And so we have to get past our preconceived notion of who we are and what we can do. I have friends and colleagues that are a little bit older than me, and they believe that they're out to pasture now. I think that's a bunch of bunk, but I've probably got a good another 15, 20 years of business in me, and I'm going to go down fighting. The other thing is, as we progress toward this idea of a flattened, distributed workforce, we have to look at things that interest us. What are you interested in? There's that old adage that you don't know a day's work if you're doing something you enjoy. Well, what are you interested in? I've talked to computer programmers, and I'm thinking to myself, I've worked for software companies, and I've worked around these guys and gals. They're geniuses. But I look at them, I'm like, how in the world can you get excited about sitting there typing all day, numbers and terminology that makes no sense? What they tell me is they love figuring out the problem. Mm-hmm. See, the journey for them to getting to that answer is writing all this code. And then, of course, in the midst of that, they create, they call them enhancements, I call them bugs, whatever. They create these problems along the way, and they have to figure out how in the world did that happen. Mm-hmm. And they have to collaborate, and for them, it's the adventure.
Right.
Well, my thing is, anything you do can have adventure in it. I look at what we're doing today. This is an adventure. Next week I'm doing a video and I'm talking to people in the Middle East. That's an adventure for me. I get on an airplane and go somewhere. I don't know what I'm doing half the time. I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? But it's the adventure. So I would say, find what you like, figure out how you can make money doing it, and then do it. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. That doesn't mean that it's just going to fall from the sky tomorrow and you're going, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. It's going to take initiative. You're going to have to chase that down with purpose. It is not easy, but it is doable. It is certainly doable.
I really like that you put in the adventure part. It's something I frequently think about, but I've never really thought to define it by that word. And that makes so much sense, right? Because you talk about what do you love to do? What are you passionate about? What excites you? What energizes you? And then from there, kind of narrow down. And I've always approached it with pretty much the same question that was posed to me when I worked at Deloitte. As I had a partner sit down, and he said, "Are you a people person? Are you a numbers person, like process person?" Well, I'm a little odd in that I do both, not numbers, process. But my sweet spot is people. And so, I try to pose that back with people I work with, is figuring out, are you a people person or a process person, and start narrowing your channels down from there. But I love that concept around your interests, and then building in an element of adventure, but that adventure could be anything. And I think the example of code is great, because for me, that's just like, I'd rather, put sharp objects in my eyes. Like it would just drive me crazy. But for somebody else, there is so much purpose to it for them, and there is excitement and adventure in it, which is a great example.
I think that the future of work, the future of entrepreneurship, is the ability to create things from nothing. Mm-hmm. Now, here's what I mean by that. And I've written down some notes, so please forgive me if I look down. The largest taxi cab company in the world owns absolutely no cars.
Ah,
And we know it as Uber.
Uber, yeah.
The most popular media owner in the world creates no content. And we know that is Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
I've got two more examples. The most valuable retailer in the world has absolutely no inventory. Do you know which one that is?
Amazon? No, it would
No,
be Amazon.
Amazon. Amazon has
They do
actually,
because of distribution.
yeah, they have distribution centers. It's Alibaba.
Oh, I wouldn't even have thought about that.
I wouldn't have
Okay.
either. And here's the last one. The world's largest accommodation provider owns absolutely no real estate.
Huh.
Airbnb.
BB, yeah.
So my point here is, don't think that you have to go out and build a widget and sell a widget. There are ways to create market share and cool things from the air. I mean, these four examples, they just came up with a website.
Yeah.
And so, now they're making millions and millions, billions probably in some cases. What are we going to do tomorrow? What is the solution? We are going to be a freelance economy. We're going to be a maker society. And we need to find ways to tie into that. I call it the future. I call people that are living in this world cloud workers. Mm-hmm. They're going to be taught. That's kind of my coined word that I did a couple of years ago at a conference. I said, these are cloud workers. They're clouding, they're remoting. They're learning how to create stuff. We are entering into an age of ideas. We still need widgets. We still need things. We still need someone to fill this bottle of water so I can drink it. We still need people to make this computer and this microphone. But the bottom line is we are a maker society and we're going to be a freelance society.
I love the age of ideas. Sorry, I get a little giggly. That makes me so excited because you know how I feel about ideas. You and I'd sit in the coffee shop all the time when you lived here and we talk ideas and concepts and theories for where we see life going. So I think that's really exciting. Where do we see the shift with technology then? I mean, we've talked a little bit about, remote workforce or even currently open organizations using things like, I've become a big fan of Slack. I use Slack a lot. I know a lot of companies that do and some other things along those lines, but what have you seen in your research then? So here's kind of one other caveat to that. With working with Gen Z recently, I'm learning, trying to do some research on their generation because they're about a year to 2 years to entering the workforce if they're going through an undergrad environment. And so those kids that are currently leaving high school right now, these are kids that have grown up with technology. They get a lot of slack for being on their phones all the time, but they are heavy users of social media. They're heavy storytellers. Their relationship building skills are very unique from the platforms that they've been using. So where do we see that fitting in maybe accelerating some of that remote workforce concept?
Yes, actually, I do think that our future generations, and I shouldn't say future generations, they're already here.
Right.
Our current generation. And actually, when you say generation, it includes everyone alive at the time you're alive. So really, even the old folks that are, retired, they're part of our generation. But yes, I think that we're going to see a society that desires knowledge and is going to use information. As a matter of fact, if you do any studies on big data, now I hate that term, big data. It's all data. And knowledge commons, Slack, is a communication tool, but it's also part of a knowledge commons. And what I mean by knowledge commons is that's someplace where you can go and get all the information you need for a given idea or stream of ideas. I've used Slack before when I'm collaborating with colleagues to write a paper or a book or a chapter of a book. So we're using these technologies. I see future employees and upcoming employees using this technology, even in the day-to-day process. But here's something else that I think you need to pay attention to as you're going through this. All types of communication and information is changing. Think of it this way. Jen, when you and I were younger, and I'm going to just throw myself under the bus, I had a television as a kid where I had to get up and go turn the knob. Okay. And we had like 4 channels.
Yes.
Now we've got hundreds and hundreds of channels of information, right? But here's the thing. I am not watching one single program through cable television right now. I have a Roku box, and I'm using all the different channels that are available to me. And honestly, if it's free, it's for me. I like watching free television. So I don't have a cable, package. I do have internet, but I don't have a cable package. So the way we interact with television and radio and the internet, all of that is changing. In fact, a lot of times I'm just watching news and information just through my laptop.
Right.
The very one I'm talking to you through right now.
Yeah, it's been my education tool since I, got turned on to it a little while back. And it's, I actually just read an article just a number of days ago talking about Comcast and the struggle they're looking at because millennials aren't purchasing cable packages, and they're still kind of in that state of denial of no, everybody still needs cable. But a lot of us have already made that shift where we just don't see the value in it because we stream it. We want to do it on our time scales when we want to do it. A lot of us, I'm a binger. I like to wait till something's done and then watch, 13 episodes at a time. So, you're correct in that concept that it's all shifting in how we view it, how we take it in, we listen to it.
Well, think of it this way. In 1993, I untethered myself. Now, what that means to those who don't understand what untethered means is that I moved to a cell phone, only a cell phone. And I'm going to tell you, that was one of the hardest decisions I made 2003, not 1993, 2003. I untethered myself from a lined phone.
Yes.
Hardest decision I ever made. 6 months later, best decision I ever made. Now True. I can't get rid of the stupid thing. So the other thing I wanted to go back to, and that is you were talking about education. The way we're interacting with higher education or education in general is changing. For example, Course A and other websites out there give you access to Ivy League education for free or at a reduced price. So if you go to like a website, Course A, you are going to be able to take classes that are from, Princeton and Yale and all these other, and then other schools that are out there that aren't Ivy League. But my point is the way that we're even interacting with education is changing. In fact, I, as a adjunct professor in the past, I truly believe that we're 5 to 10 years away from higher education organizations starting their collapse. Meaning they can no longer sustain themselves because they're these behemoths. Now, I'm not saying brick and mortar education is going away, but what I'm saying is they will go through a massive change because people are going to want to go to school online and at a distance. I did my master's and my PhD from a distance. I did have to go and sit in a classroom for what we called residencies for my doctorate, but nonetheless, my education was done remotely. And so it's natural for me to say, where we're going and what I see and believe is we're going to be a remote society, meaning I can work and play and learn and communicate wherever in the world I am, as long as I have a contact with internet.
Absolutely. Which is something that needs to change too, the accessibility, to be consistent accessibility.
Oh, absolutely. And I would say one other thing, I don't think we're much further away from having these idea of data packages going away completely. I mean, I remember when you had a regular tethered phone and you had to pay by the minute for a long distance phone call. Now you just pay a flat fee every month.
Right.
I don't think we're that much further away from just a flat fee for data packages. I know some organizations are offering them. I think Sprint has a $70 a month deal, whatever, but I don't think they're there yet.
Right.
When you're talking $30 a month for for unlimited data, then talk to me. And I'm talking 5G, not 3G or 2G. So
I can't wait for that day, honestly. with two boys that consume data like crazy, it would be nice to be to that place. So I'm really great. We've got a lot of great listeners on right now, and just reading some of the comments over here. And Zeph Sand said, I've even had the privilege to work with a virtual global team of interns for 4 years, and it's truly a remote team. And I'd love to hear some of your comments, or if you'd like to type in a question here of any challenges you saw with that, or some of the successes you've seen in working with an intern group that is global. I know there's a lot of challenges from a cultural perspective. There's challenges often from technology, potentially could be a challenge. What have you seen from the cultural side, Philip?
Well, I've had the privilege of traveling a little bit outside of the U.S., Central America, South America. I've gone to the Middle East. Back in November, I was actually in Saudi Arabia. And the interesting thing that I'm learning is that we, as business owners, as entrepreneurs, as future cloud workers, if you want to use that terminology, we have to be painfully aware of differing cultures. The way we communicate is different. The way we do socially acceptable things or not is different. I'd be curious to hear feedback from those who have actually dealt on these teams but what I'm finding is that they have to learn how to communicate across all these different spectrums. And part of the research that I'm doing for my next book is talking about how do we deal with these cultural gaps? How do we deal with the problem between what I believe and what you believe? And I'm not meaning necessarily religion or politics. What I'm meaning are social graces. For example, when I was in Saudi Arabia, there were certain things you just did not do that weren't socially acceptable. For example, you had to be aware of which hand you shook with. You had to be aware of whether or not you were speaking to a female or not, if you were looking them in the eye. I mean, there were some issues there from the cultural standpoint. And of course, when you're traveling abroad and you're representing yourself in a global arena, you want to make sure that you're not offending anyone. So as leaders, we have to become culturally aware of what's going on. There are going to be communication gaps, but the bigger issue is our cultural gaps.
I found that with, it was about, oh gosh, time's just flying by too quickly anymore. But I think it was right around 6 years ago, I had an opportunity to do a live virtual training with India, and with a group of administrative assistants, and was taking them through a program that I'd created with Deloitte to do the basically learning how to operate from best practices that we utilized with our US teams. And I found the challenge for me was not their willingness, not their openness to learn, but the cultural aspect and shift from a business standpoint. In particular, I was working with a group of women who worked with a group of men, and culturally there were so many differences. Our best practices didn't translate as well as they could have. Now they operated within the confines of, the global organization, and there were things they needed to do. But there's often a hesitancy to be able to execute on any best practice because it's just not what was done. Their ability to where I would have a U.S. employee approach a partner that they worked with and supported, and they'd be comfortable. They had developed a rapport, and they would be able to push back and say, time says we have to reprioritize here, so I'm going to push this project to here and whatnot, where they lacked that structure culturally. Mm-hmm. So it was definitely a challenge, and one that potentially will continue to present a challenge, I would assume.
Yes, and one of the things that I try to do when I'm developing curriculum or projects or something that's for another country, I'm trying to collaborate with a colleague that's on the ground there that understands the culture, the language, the nuances that maybe I don't know. And I also try to do my research before I go into that situation to understand some of those cultural nuances. But the bigger challenge is, as leaders, is to step back and say, yes, I might have a best practice, or I might have an idea that's perfect for your organization or your division. However, I want to hear what works for you and why does it work? And how can we marry these two ideas together? Because now you're saying you guys have some expertise also. And what we're finding is that many times, and we Americans are really bad at this, we go into situations and we say, hey, I'm the expert and you're going to do it the way I tell you to do it. The interesting thing is we don't always know everything. And we have to accept that and admit it. And as a leader and an entrepreneur, it's okay to say, I don't know. I just don't know. So when I'm working, for example, when I went down to South America, I said to my person that I was going to work with, my handler is what we call him. I said, is there anything I need to know about the culture that's unacceptable that you see Americans do or other people do that's just really stupid? What is there? Tell me what not to do. And they'll usually say, don't do this or do that, or if someone offers you something to eat, here's how you handle that if you really don't like it or whatever. And I'm going to tell you, I've eaten some weird things. I'm not there where I will eat bizarre things, but I've eaten some interesting things. Just as a side note, my most interesting thing I've ever eaten is pigeon. And that was in Saudi Arabia. So anyhow,
chicken? Does it taste like chicken? I have to know.
it tastes like a game bird. So, like
a game ear
pheasant or something. But anyhow, my point is this. If you regard the person on the ground that's there as part of the set of experts, you are going to move a lot further along than if you go in and say, this is the way to do it, my way or the highway. Now, here's something that's interesting, though. Many times when I go into one of these countries, they automatically see me as the expert because of my degree or my education or whatever, or my experience. And what I try to do is I try to say, be gracious and say thank you for acknowledging the hard work that I've done. However, how can we work together for a solution? I'm constantly pulling them back into the fold. Now, here's what's really interesting. When I was teaching, I had my first semester ever teaching. I taught 7 women in my class were from China. Now, what I learned was I would ask a question. And obviously the American branding and style of teaching is you ask a question and you want someone to answer. But instead, that's what I got. Not a movement, wouldn't even look at me, wouldn't say a word, wouldn't grunt, nothing. Finally, after class, several weeks into it, one of the ladies came up to me and said, Professor, I want to explain something to you culturally. I want you to understand that in China, we are not allowed to address the professor because you are like God. And I said, well, I really appreciate where you're coming from culturally, and I will, understand if you don't talk in class, but please understand that the only way you're going to learn in my class is to interact with me, because this is a conversation. This is not me dictating what you're going to know. This is about pulling out of you what you already know and making it useful. And so sometimes I go into these things thinking I've got it figured out, and then I get thrown this side thing that, hey, you don't know anything about my culture. And so then from here on out, I know that if I'm dealing with someone from an Asian culture, perhaps the power distance, meaning how far away they feel they are from the leader, is quite great. And so they look at me as if I'm way up here and they're down here. Even if they're an equal, they will look at me from a distance of power.
So I would assume then, based on our earlier conversations, the Chinese are probably not open to open organization.
Well,
from a cultural standpoint, it seems as though it may go against it.
Yeah, from a cultural standpoint, some cultures are going to have a greater challenge with openness than others. That is not to say that they can't do it or won't do it. It's only to say that they're going to have a greater learning curve than other people. And I noticed someone that's in the chat just said they are that they're a student of Chinese, and they have a bit of understanding of their culture. So they would understand what I was talking about there. I forgot the question now. I'm so sorry.
Open organization and culture.
So the greater the power distance, and when I'm this is Hofstadter's power distance. You can look that up later. It's another doctoral thing, but it's a theory that certain cultures view their distance from the leader really close to really far away, and that's called a power distance. And so countries that have a great power distance, like Hofstadter has explained in his books, they have a harder time with sharing and openness. That's not to say that they don't do it, because here's what's interesting. Many years ago, and this would have been when I was a kid at least, there was this guy going around the world, or specifically to the US, saying, hey, I have this concept for making manufacturing more efficient. And he went to automakers and he said, listen, I want to offer this process to you that will help you to be more efficient, and it'll cut down on any problems. You won't have a lemon, if you will. So here's what happened. The automakers in the U.S. said, no, we don't need you. We're doing just fine. Our old way, Henry Ford came up with it, first in, first out. We're good. So this guy by the name of Deming goes to the Japanese and says, hey, I have this idea, and it's to make things more efficient. Now, one of their ideas was, if you find a flaw or defect in the line, you shut the line down. Anyone on the line has the power to press the red button and say, boom, stop, and fix it. That is in itself a form of empowerment and openness. Now, that's a long way away from the open organization that I'm talking about, but my point is that even countries with great power distances are open to some of these ideals. And so the question is, how long does it take us to close that gap?
Well, John has offered a question here. With the new economy, what happens to these countries that have this closed mindset?
Well, they're going to get drug along, I think. It's interesting that we're watching this economy change, and some of the countries that you would not imagine doing so are the ones that are adopting these ideas first. And the countries that you would think would adopt it at a quicker rate are not. And I would offer the United States as an example. We are known as innovators, and of course we've come up with things like Apple and Google and Facebook and on and on and on. However, we are really slow to change the way we approach leadership and hierarchy, because we have this belief system that the person at the top is the one that's in charge, and they're there for a certain reason. And so we're actually having a harder time dealing with this than other countries, let's say like Finland, or some of the Middle Eastern countries, which I was surprised with. Middle Eastern countries are very open to some of these ideals, even though they come from a kingdom mentality. They're open to sharing and the like. Now, there are some hierarchy issues still there that we're having to deal with, but the countries that will not move along will get left behind. Mm-hmm. And we're already starting to see that happen with countries that have gone deeper into socialism or communism or whatever. For example, Venezuela, I happen to have some contacts down there, and so I'm aware of what's going on in the country. They're teetering closer and closer to collapse because they believe they have to have a more consolidated power and control. We're finding that countries that have, looser power and control are becoming more efficient and effective, and you're seeing their markets are doing much better. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we're all tied together, so sometimes what one person does pulls down the rest of us. So
true, as that can happen in community. Well,
Yes.
Philip, we're getting close to the end of our hour, so I'd love kind of your final thoughts. If we've got any questions, I know we've had a few folks that have just jumped in, and I'd love for them to ask questions. I don't mind going over our hour if we've got some great dialogue and questions. So I'll let you kind of wrap that up, and this is last call for any questions for Dr. Philip Foster.
So this kind of brings me to where I am today and what I'm working on today. I'm doing some research on this idea of the remote worker. We used to call this telecommuting or digital commuting or whatever you want to call it, distributed workforce, remote worker. I really don't care. Freelancer, consultant, they're all in the same genre, if you will. But what I'm looking at is where we're headed as a working society, as a marketplace. And I truly believe that the future of business is how do we affect the bottom line in interesting ways. Now, some people are not going to like this, but a lot of times it has to do with something called a pink slip. They lose their job, on the pink slip. But in all seriousness, what are we doing to prepare for an eventual economy where you no longer get in your car and drive to an office? Now, this is going to affect gas prices. It's going to affect automobile pricing. It's going to affect so many different things because of the way we interact. In fact, it's going to affect things that we don't even think about. For example, where I live here in Ohio, I have a grocery store within minutes of my house. All I have to do is go online and order my groceries, and they tell me when to come pick them up. And I pay for it, coupons and all. Boom, it's done. It takes me 30 minutes, and I order all of my my groceries. Amazon is doing the same thing. They're dealing with this, in 2 hours. And I think where you live in Tennessee, they're actually doing that where you can get your groceries delivered in 2 hours. So, working from home is going to open up a whole new world of things. Microeconomies are going to expand. It's no longer going to be unusual for everything to be done, where you go and pick it up. Or it's delivered to you. As a matter of fact, even in my own life, I've noticed in the last year, my wife, my family, and I, we have started ordering more things online because we don't want to be bothered with traffic. We don't want to be bothered with the store. I even ordered a part for something in my house and went and picked it up from Lowe's a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. So anyhow, my point is things that we can't even imagine changing, or at least thinking about changing, are changing as a result of us working from home.
Absolutely. So it looks like we've got Halima that might like to join. Do you have a moment to take a call, or should we wrap? Because I don't want to interrupt your schedule. Good. Okay, we'll do that. And then John's also asked a question. We'll see. We'll get to John's question here in just a moment. I'll give Halima a second to join on. Sometimes the video takes a moment to catch up. In the moment, though, let's ask John's question here is, will a focused skill set be better? You can offer those specific skills to multiple employers or clients.
This is a two-edged sword, John. Having a specialty is a wonderful thing, but what we're finding is marketability is going to be in our area of generalist. How well are we able to meet the broad needs of a client or workforce employer rather? I have a specialty. My PhD has a specialty area. However, I do have a broad set of basic skills that I can call on at any time to help out a client or if I were working for someone. So, yes, focus skills are great, but really the power is going to be in our diversity and in our generalist segment of what we're able to offer.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we're not able to see Halima, so I'm going to give her a moment if she can ask her question over in the side, and then if not, we'll kind of wrap up from there. Give her just 1 second for that. But in the meantime, I'll just do this. I really appreciate that you've joined us today. I mean, you've given me so much to think about, and I feel like we talk frequently, and I can stay on top of most of what you've got going on. But you've really given me a lot to think about, even with the work that I'm doing and how to translate that back from a generational standpoint with the millennials and Gen Z that I get to work with. So this has been really interesting to think about how we can look at things like open organization, the shift in even our leadership style, which is very fitting for me. I was very excited to hear that, thinking about the empowerment and collaboration, communication styles and all of that. And then really focusing on how do we become this remote workforce, or what you call them, cloud workers. I love that. And I do think, and maybe you can make one last comment to this, I get asked frequently about work-life balance, and are we going to begin to see more of an actual shift to where we don't just talk to it, but we actually start walking out work-life balance? I would imagine that moving to this lifestyle with utilizing our technology, working smarter versus harder, and all of these concepts, that we would see more of a work-life balance.
Well, that's an area that I'm working on in my next book, is this whole idea of how do we balance out, because really we've shifted to a 24/7 society where we're always on, if you will. And one of the things that I'm reading constantly about is how they're telling leaders, stop sending emails at 11 o'clock at night or 2 in the morning, because what you're doing is you're creating this need for the employee to answer you. It may not be urgent. It may be, can you order trash bags for the office? Yeah. But it creates this idea of, oh my gosh, the boss is up at 2 a.m. Maybe I should be up working at 2 a.m. And so we have to understand that as leaders, it's just as much our responsibility as our followers to disengage at some point. The other thing is we're moving toward a time where we're no longer working 9 to 5. We're no longer working 8-hour days. In fact, there are some people that say that they're probably more productive in a 4-hour day than most of us who work 9 or 10 hours. Right. So we're seeing a shift in how we view time. And so, this idea of clock watching is going away. We've got all these shifts happening in that. And so work-life balance is another thing. Why do I love working from home? Well, because I probably have a little bit of ADD myself. I like to get up and walk around or go maybe, I have stuff in the washing machine. I may go switch it over to the dryer or whatever. Or I might decide to go for a walk down the street. I may decide I want to go work at a coffee shop. Yeah. Work-life balance for me is about stepping away from all of this stuff, getting away from it and doing something else. In fact, yesterday was President's Day. I was working, but I also had kids home. So guess what I was doing? I was doing fun things with the kids. I was doing laundry or whatever had to be done around the house, but I was also working. So I may work in smaller compartments of time, but I'm getting what I believe to be more done. And in fact, we're finding people are more efficient when they're able to unplug from things for a little bit. That's why you're seeing organizations with ping pong tables and, video games. And I've been in organizations where they allow you to pick, if you're going to come into the office, they allow you to pick where you're going to sit. Some may sit in a hammock, some may sit on the floor, some may lounge on a couch, some may sit up at the bar. Oh, by the way, they had a fully loaded bar with beer on tap and wine and liquor and all that. Yes, at the office. And so
I need to get back to work in the office then.
Or can you put a bar behind you? So my point is this. When we have a little bit of fun in the midst of getting things done no longer seems to be a chore. We actually enjoy hanging out. As a matter of fact, the most fun that I have in doing work is when I'm talking to friends, maybe yourself or someone else, and we're just talking about ideas, and I'm sitting here making notes as we're talking, much like you're probably doing as we're talking. I get more accomplished and more ideas and more things come out of that collaboration than if I just sat here in this room by myself and stared at the wall.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've got one last question.
Okay.
So that is from, since Halima could not join us via video, she's questioning what competencies would be needed in 5 years from now. So if we had like a core set of competencies that you've seen in a lot of your research, what do we think we'd narrow those down to? I'm guessing that they're going to be more soft skills, competency related than technical stuff, but I could be wrong.
Well, I think it's a mixed bag, really. I think that we're going to need to know how to communicate. Now, I truly believe that technology is going to take us to the point where I won't need to know another language. For example, as we're talking here, I imagine a technology coming, and actually Skype is working on this, where on the other side, the computer is translating and speaking to that individual in their language that they choose.
Right.
So I think that those type of skills, yes, we need them right now, but will we really need to know another language in the future? Probably not. However, I do think that we're going to find the worker of the future might have more technology skills, whether it be computer languages or whether or not they know how to use certain programs. We're going to find that they're going to know how to do that. The employee of the future is going to understand collaboration in a new way that we aren't tapping into right now. They're going to know how to communicate more effectively. We're going to have a cultural diversity, and I'm not talking about you're Chinese and I'm American type culture. I'm talking about internal culture. We're going to have an empowerment level that has not been seen in a long time. So I think that, we've got a lot of things coming. Soft skills, though, here's what I see big time. Our ability to argue, disagree. Now, here's what I mean. Now, you and I, Jen, offline, we might tangle over an idea, and I think we have before, and that's okay. I love you. You're my dear friend. But that doesn't mean we have to agree. When I'm teaching, I had a classroom full of Saudi Arabian men. And I said, listen, I may come from a different culture or religious background or whatever than you, but the bottom line is we don't have to always agree. What we have to do is be able to respect each other and build on each other's ideas. Because at the end of the day, if I cut myself and you cut yourself, we both bleed the same. Absolutely. We breathe the same air in, we breathe the same air out. So our ability to have disagreements are going to be really important. And I think right now we're witnessing this unfold just in the political arena. We're watching this polar division in the country, in the U.S., where it's just divisive. I mean, they're just at each other. You don't even have to pick one or the other. I mean, just look at what they're doing internally.
Right.
I think, though, that what's going to come out of that large amount of divisiveness is our ability to have a discourse and to be able to still be friends. I have a certain political leaning. I have a good friend that has an opposite political leaning than me. When we get together and we debate, whether it be on Facebook or whatever, people think we hate each other. It's hysterical. We actually have more fun making people think we hate each other than anything. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, we look at each other and say, hey, you want to go have a beer? Because we're friends. We've been friends for over 30 years. That isn't going to change. But the bottom line is our ability to disagree and have discourse, but also to have union and unity is going to be a skill that we have to learn how to engage in, and we have to learn pretty quickly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This has been awesome. We've got a little over time, so we kind of want to go ahead and wrap it up for the sake of the podcast itself. But Philip, again, I thank you so much. Anybody that wants to follow Philip, he has his Blab channel here. You can follow him on Twitter at Maximum Change. You can also go to his website to get the book, Open Organization, follow what he's doing from a world-shaping perspective, my friend, at MaximumChange.com or .org. Okay, make sure I didn't.
That's
Make sure I
correct.
didn't misspeak on that one. And you can catch up with me at jenkelchner.com or comparisonisaKiller.com as well, with the movement that I'm about in the world right now. And I thank all of you that have joined and have left great comments, asked fantastic questions. So definitely catch the replay of this blab when you're done, because we missed some great things in the very beginning. And we look forward to seeing you next week at the leadership table. Thank you, Philip.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.